Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the articles that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen a total of 9 articles. There are 4 articles relevant both for prelims and mains, and they require a thorough analysis. And we have few small articles relevant only for the prelims exam. So let's cover all the 9 articles in detail so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking our initiative, please support us with your likes and comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And also, join our official Telegram channel by scanning the QR code or by clicking on the link provided in the video description. Because after the session ends, we conduct a daily quiz on these topics. So it will help you practice MCQs and revise these articles as you prepare for the upcoming prelims exam. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at this important editorial from page number 8. This editorial is related to the recent fire tragedy that occurred in a hospital in the Jhansi district of Uttar Pradesh. I'm sure some of you would have heard about this horrific incident, a tragic incident in a hospital in Jhansi where a fire broke out, most likely due to an electrical short circuit, that too in the neonatal department, where several infants were being provided with intensive care. As a result of this fire tragedy, several infants have been killed, and this has become a recurring story in India, particularly in Uttar Pradesh. You might have heard about a similar fire incident few months ago in Delhi, where in a Delhi hospital, a fire tragedy led to the death of several infants. In Uttar Pradesh, there have been similar incidents. If not a fire tragedy, there have been incidents where due to shortage of oxygen supply, several infants have lost their lives in UP hospitals. So this has raised a very disturbing, alarming situation in our hospitals, raising concern about India's healthcare system. It not only raises concern about the healthcare system overall, but it also raises concern about the lack of fire safety in India. So essentially, one can assume that we aren't making adequate investments in healthcare, especially public healthcare. Be it the state governments or the center, they are at fault, they are accountable for these tragedies, for these incidents, which highlight the critical gaps in our healthcare infrastructure and the lack of fire safety norms and standards being followed in hospitals. So the editorial correctly points out that this is a classic case of twin negligence by the governments, where they are neglecting healthcare and neglecting fire safety as well. So the topic becomes relevant for GS paper 2 and as well as for GS paper 3. So let's dive a little deep into this topic and understand why these tragedies are occurring again and again. What are the root causes, the issues, the structural problems which could be leading to these incidents? So let's examine this. Now, if you look at Uttar Pradesh, which has seen multiple such tragedies in hospitals, especially where infants are losing lives, you will find that they have inadequate infrastructure. They also have a very limited availability of doctors. Data shows that most hospitals in UP are overcrowded. In fact, to be fair to UP, this is the situation across hospitals in the country, especially public hospitals. If you look at the neonatal care units, where intensive care is provided to infants, most of the neonatal care units in public hospitals are overutilized beyond their capacity. For example, in the Delhi hospital, where a tragedy occurred few months ago, where several infants were killed, that hospital had only 18 intensive care units. but the number of infants that they were taking care of was in the range of 45 to 60. Essentially, these hospitals are dealing with a 3-time overload beyond their capacity and infrastructure. So this will obviously lead to inadequate care. It could lead to negligence. It could lead to such tragedies which will consume the life of innocent people. The lack of infrastructure, the inadequate facilities available has been a pressing concern, and the only way in which you can address this is by bringing more public investments into healthcare. Just look at the doctor to population ratio of Uttar Pradesh. This is a very important statistic according to me, because this clearly tells a lot about the state of healthcare in a particular region. The doctor to population ratio, which is essentially the size of the population being treated by one doctor on average. According to WHO, the World Health Organization, the ideal doctor to population ratio should be 1:1,000. It means that according to WHO, one doctor can reasonably handle a population of 1,000 people, and the number of patients amongst those 1,000 can be managed by one doctor on average. But if you look at Uttar Pradesh and its doctor to population ratio, it's an alarming 1:2,158. It is more than double the WHO recommended doctor to population ratio. So basically, doctors in UP are dealing with more than twice the burden, and this will lead to negligence, failures, and accidents and such tragedies. If you look at the doctor to population ratio across India, the overall doctor to population ratio of India is 1:836, which is actually much better than the WHO recommended standard. Which means that rest of India, at least some states are doing much better, but few states like UP are falling behind. The doctor to population ratio is a clear indicator of the lack of infrastructure, lack of investments, the lack of facilities available, which definitely contributes to such incidents and tragedies. Also, this raises important questions about disaster management, how we are dealing with fires, what are the fire safety norms and standards being followed in public sector institutions and in organizations. If you look at investments being made in healthcare in India, it is grossly inadequate. If you look at the budget of 2022 or the union budget of 2023, in these budgets, the allocation made towards healthcare was 2.2% of India's GDP. This was roughly the budgetary allocation that was provided. Now this year, in this year's budget, this has declined to 1.75%. 1.75% of the budgetary allocation has been for healthcare, and you can see that decline happening as far as investments in healthcare is concerned. If you look at data from 2021, the overall public health expenditure incurred in India stands at around 3.3% of India's GDP. Now, these numbers are very, very poor numbers when we compare with other similar countries. When we compare with peers like Brazil or South Africa, these countries which are similarly placed to India as developing nations, they have a substantial investment in healthcare. For example, Brazil invests around 10% in public healthcare as a percentage of its GDP. South Africa has been investing 8% of its GDP in healthcare. So India's number is hardly in the range of 2 to 3%, which is at the bottom level of the developing nations. If you take similar developing countries and look at their healthcare expenses, India comes almost at the bottom of the average. So this is quite alarming, because data from National Crime Records Bureau, the NCRB, shows that there are repeated incidents of hospital fire, not just in UP, but across India. In Uttar Pradesh alone, more than 100 people lost their lives in 2022. Many such tragedies are occurring across India. And in fact, ahead of UP in terms of hospital-related fire tragedies, there are other states which raise a bigger concern. Odisha, Maharashtra, Bihar. Lot of fire tragedies occur. And again, if you go beyond hospitals, if you look at shopping malls, coaching centers, or public offices, fire safety norms and standards are not being followed and implemented. The local bylaws of the municipal authorities are not enforced. The local authorities often have a corrupt nexus with the builders, with the owners, leading to lack of implementation and enforcement of the fire norms and fire safety standards. This leads to repeated incidents of such fire tragedies where several people, hundreds of people in India are losing lives every year. So this is a very serious and alarming situation, and it calls for more investments in healthcare and as well as in fire safety. So that is why I feel this article, this editorial is very, very important, and you can anticipate a question either in GS paper 2 or in GS paper 3. Now, if you have any questions, any doubts, please let me know. I'll try to take up those questions from the comment section. But before that, look at this practice question. Recurring incidents of hospital fire highlights the lack of investments in fire safety and healthcare in India. Elucidate. So let me provide an approach which can help you in writing an answer to this question, and then I will take up your doubts from the comment section. So for such a question, you can provide an introduction based on recent incidents from current affairs. You can mention a couple of incidents like the fire tragedy in a hospital in Jhansi or the fire tragedy in a Delhi hospital where several infants were killed. And this shows the recurring pattern of incidents across India, particularly in Uttar Pradesh, where fire safety norms are not being followed in hospitals, and it clearly highlights the lack of facilities and infrastructure in healthcare in India. So by citing these examples, these incidents which are reported in current affairs, you are setting the context for the answer. So in the introduction itself, you can point out that there is a twin failure, a failure of fire safety norms and failure in healthcare. So once you point out the core issues, then in the body you can provide the specific analysis. In the body you can compare India's doctor to population ratio, how in some states it's very poor, way below the WHO standards. You can compare our investments in healthcare and draw a comparison with other countries, or talk about the lack of fire safety norms, how it is not enforced at the local level. So bring this out in the body and then provide a conclusion. Include some suggestions as a way forward which can help address the challenges in our healthcare and fire safety. So that would make for a well-rounded answer, a comprehensive answer addressing all the key points. So let's see if you can write an answer to this question. So before that, let's look at some doubts. Let's look at some questions. Tarak is asking, sir, why states are not taking up more than 8% of the budget for healthcare? See, that's simply because they don't have the financial resources, the financial capability to provide for such a higher allocation for healthcare. This is where the center will have to provide higher allocation and assist the states to increase the investments in healthcare. Next, Ilma Islam is asking, do we have any safety standards with regard to safety in key infrastructure? Yes, absolutely. With regard to critical infrastructure and as well as public and private infrastructure, there are basic safety standards. These fire safety norms are often issued by the local authorities, the municipal authorities. At the national level, the National Disaster Management Authority under the Ministry of Home Affairs would have issued a set of guidelines which need to be implemented at the local level. Next, a student is asking, heat climate is part of fire causes? Yes, absolutely. Climate change has contributed to more extreme weather incidents. So extreme heat waves could contribute to such fire tragedies as well. Next, a student is asking, why not increase the doctor to patient ratio? Yes, that is obviously the way forward, but it's not so easy to increase the doctor to population ratio because that will take a lot of investments in medical education, right? You need to create more seats, more vacancies, provide the infrastructure needed for medical colleges, for research, and create job opportunities. So that calls for a lot of investments and it is a long-term process, right? It will not happen immediately. So that requires investments now so that you can improve the doctor to population ratio maybe 5 or 8 or 10 years down the line. So with this, let's move on to the next editorial. On page number 8, we have another interesting editorial related to India's relations with Africa. Any idea why India-Africa relations are in the news? In fact, in yesterday's newspaper, there was an important article and I skipped it deliberately because it was for sure that there would be repeat articles in today's paper and I wanted to club all the articles together to have a comprehensive discussion. Any idea why India-Africa relations are in the news? Anyone in the comments? No? Prime Minister Modi carried out a very important visit to Nigeria. Nigeria is a West African country located in West Africa. PM Modi is visiting 3 countries back to back. Apart from visiting Nigeria, he is also visiting Brazil to attend this year's G20 summit. Brazil is currently hosting the G20 for 2024 at Rio de Janeiro. So PM Modi, while traveling to Brazil, had a stopover visit in Nigeria, which is a very important West African country. After attending the G20 in Brazil, PM Modi will be traveling to Guyana, which is another important nation. And we will cover these visits as well in subsequent sessions. Maybe I'll even take a special class. And if you want a special session on this visit of PM Modi, please let me know in the comments so that we can comprehensively cover PM's visit to Nigeria, Brazil, and Guyana once the visit is completed. So do let me know in the comments, and if there are enough students asking for it, I will consider doing a separate video on this topic. But now let's take the help of this editorial and based on the developments in Nigeria, let's understand India-Nigeria relations and why it is significant for India-Africa relations. Because India has given a lot of focus, a lot of priority for Africa. As you all know, Africa is blessed with resources from oil and gas to uranium to critical minerals to forest and agricultural resources. Africa is a blessed continent. And that is the reason why it has become a theater of competition. Given that Africa is blessed with resources, it has become a theater of competition amongst global powers, be it United States, European powers which had colonized Africa, and even Russia, China, and many other middle powers as well, like Japan, South Korea, Turkey, Australia, and of course India. All these countries are competing for influence in Africa. They are making big investments, taking up big infrastructure projects, and building relations with the governments so that they can access the precious African resources. But one challenge in Africa is that it is affected by instability. It is affected by backwardness, lack of development. Africa has one of the poorest human development indicators. Education, healthcare, everything remains backward with very poor infrastructure and barely any economic and livelihood opportunities for the people. Africa faces rampant poverty. It's affected by multiple diseases, including infectious diseases. And this has been a big challenge. The political instability in many African countries is one of the prime causes. Many African countries are going through civil wars where different rebel factions are fighting against each other. For example, DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan. These are countries where active civil wars are present. There are multiple military dictatorships, repeated military coups carried out by the dictators where they have overthrown elected governments and democratic governments and there is no space for democracy in several African countries. And also, Africa faces multiple threats from terrorism, separatism, and insurgency. Africa is also affected by rampant piracy in the Indian Ocean and as well as in the Atlantic. It is also affected by organized crime, from drug trafficking to arms trafficking. So there are multiple threats and challenges in Africa, which makes it difficult for a country like India to engage with African countries. So India is also competing with other global powers for influence, for a certain space for India, so we can build meaningful relations and partnerships with African countries. And Nigeria is one of the key focus countries for India. As a West African country, Nigeria is extremely important for India, and I'll explain why. There could be a possible prelims question as well based on this. Nigeria is one of the top economies of Africa. It's one of the top African economies in terms of GDP, along with Ethiopia, and you can even include South Africa. These are the top economies of Africa. So Nigeria is a very vast, diverse economy. It is growing at a rapid pace. There is a lot of industrialization, a lot of scope for investments in agriculture, in food and food processing, in energy. So there are multiple areas of cooperation that will open up for India by working with Nigeria. So it's one of the top performing economies in Africa, and more importantly, there is a very strong Indian community in the country. Ever since Nigeria became independent from British rule in 1960, India has been the key supplier of human resource to Nigeria. In fact, India has sent the largest number of teachers and doctors to this West African country, which has helped in building Nigeria. Nigeria is thankful to India for the large number of teachers and doctors who have served in Nigeria. So Indian teachers and doctors have been the backbone of Nigeria's education system and healthcare system. Today, there are 200 Indian companies operating in the country, and they have a total investment of $27 billion. This is quite massive. There are multiple Indian companies in pharmaceuticals, automobiles, energy, textiles, and healthcare. Multiple Indian companies investing in this country, and the total investment amounts to $27 billion, which gives India considerable influence in the country. The Indian community is 60,000 strong. There are 60,000 Indians in Nigeria, which makes this the largest Indian diaspora community in West Africa. If you take all West African countries, it is in Nigeria that you find the largest Indian diaspora community. So they act as a cultural bridge. They connect India and Nigeria. They provide a human connect, a human link that binds the two societies, the two cultures, and naturally we have a strong bond and a very strong relationship. In fact, Prime Minister Modi was awarded by the Nigerian leader with the highest civilian award in recognition of this relationship. PM Modi will be the second dignitary, foreign dignitary, to have received the highest civilian award of Nigeria. India has provided a lot of development assistance as well. To help in the development of Nigeria, India has invested through concessional loans. We have provided lines of credit amounting to $100 million over the years. Over the last 2 decades, Nigeria has been a focus country for Indian diplomacy, and we have provided $100 billion worth of concessional loans, which have been invested in capacity building, training programs, etc. India runs a program known as ITEC, Indian Technical Economic Cooperation. Through this, Ministry of External Affairs provides for scholarships and training programs to several developing and underdeveloped countries. We fund their education. We provide scholarships to their students to study in Indian educational institutions. We even conduct training programs and skill development initiatives. So ITEC is very, very beneficial for multiple developing and underdeveloped countries, which is run by India, and Nigeria is one of the beneficiaries. So this is the strong relationship that exists between the two countries. In fact, in the year 2007, then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh carried out a historic visit to Nigeria and established a strategic partnership with this country. Since then, India-Nigeria relations have really flourished, and PM Modi is visiting the country after 17 years. That is, an Indian Prime Minister is visiting Nigeria after 17 years following the visit of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. So PM Modi's visit is building upon the strategic partnership, and now we have diversified the relationship into strategic areas as well. India and Nigeria have signed key agreements in the areas of defense cooperation and defense training and coordination. They have identified counter-terrorism, counter-piracy or anti-piracy, and tackling drug trafficking as priority areas of cooperation. In fact, Nigeria faces a major threat from a terrorist group called Boko Haram. I've mentioned Boko Haram in several previous classes as well. It's a notorious terrorist outfit aligned with Al-Qaeda and now with Islamic State, which commits brutal atrocities in northeast Nigeria over here. It operates in neighboring countries like Niger, Chad, and Central African Republic and Cameroon as well. But this terror group operating in Nigeria is a major security threat. So counter-terrorism, military exercises, defense cooperation, sharing intelligence, anti-piracy and countering organized crime have been identified as priority areas of cooperation. Even Nigeria is affected by piracy. Now, if you see the map over here, you can see the West African country of Nigeria. It opens towards the Atlantic Ocean, right? It has a coastline. Now, can you identify this water body over here? Can you identify this water body near West Africa, which is part of the Atlantic Ocean? This is where piracy is rampant and organized crime is also rampant. So don't think that piracy is a feature of Horn of Africa and East Africa alone. Don't think piracy is limited to Indian Ocean. Piracy can be seen towards West Africa as well over here. So I want you guys to identify which is this water body that I have marked. Nigeria faces this water body, which is part of the Atlantic, and there are multiple security threats from piracy to organized crime. So defense cooperation has been identified as the focus area between the two sides, and several important agreements have been signed. So India is looking forward to build this relationship because see, India and Nigeria have common interests. We have common priorities. Nigeria has become a partner country with the BRICS grouping. Nigeria has become a partner country to the BRICS. It might even seek BRICS membership in the coming years. And Nigeria, along with India, supports the reforms of multilateral institutions such as United Nations. Nigeria is one of the countries in Africa demanding a permanent seat, just like India. So we are like-minded countries. India and Nigeria together are pushing for permanent seat at UN Security Council and reforms of the UN, and they are seeking a bigger role in the global affairs. And this aligns with our approach, our global approach towards reforming the multilateral institutions. In fact, India has championed South-South cooperation. We have focused on global South countries, the developing, underdeveloped countries, and India has been the champion, the leader of South-South cooperation. We not only assist the countries of the global South, but we also work with them and take their help in order to raise India's profile at platforms like United Nations. So several countries from Latin America, Africa, Asia are working together to reform the UN, to seek a greater role in global governance, and India is part of the South countries and leads the global South to push for multilateral reforms. In fact, India utilized the G20 summit last year in 2023, and we secured membership for the African Union into the G20. It was because of India's leadership when India held the G20 presidency last year. We managed to secure membership for African Union that represents the African region, which is a regional group, and it joined G20 as a full-time member because of India's initiative. So this clearly shows that India has indeed prioritized Africa over the last couple of decades. But one shortcoming is that we have neglected the India-Africa Forum Summit. We haven't paid enough attention to India-Africa Forum Summit. This was India's primary initiative in African diplomacy that was started by then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh back in 2007. From 2007 to 2015, India hosted 3 summits. Just 3 India-Africa summits have been organized, and after that, it has not been continued. So this is something which needs to be addressed. And finally, there is some hope, because before PM Modi traveled to Nigeria, Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar announced that most likely next year, that is 2025, India will be hosting the 4th India-Africa Forum Summit. So if this were to happen, it will be a big development. It will cement India's influence and position, because traditionally we have focused more on East Africa and Southern Africa. Given our close historical, economic and cultural links with East and Southern Africa, these parts of Africa have always been a priority. North Africa also gets some attention from India, given its importance in West Asian geopolitics. But West Africa is one region which had often been neglected, but now this is being corrected by the Modi government. India has provided a lot of concessional loans to many West African countries. We have recently stepped up our diplomatic missions, opened new embassies and high commissions in some West African countries. We have increased our diplomatic strength. We are giving more assistance and building partnerships with West African nations. And Nigeria will be the gateway for India to extend influence in West Africa. If we have to counter China, counter United States, Russia and others who are competing across Africa, we need partnerships with such key countries. And that is why this visit of PM Modi to Nigeria is so important. So based on this, you can definitely anticipate a question. So one shortcoming in our African policy is that we haven't continued with India-Africa Forum Summit. And the second shortcoming, which I can highlight, is that we often don't fulfill the promises made. See, India would have made a lot of promises saying that we'll invest few $1 million or few $1 billion. We would have promised some assistance, but sometimes we don't fulfill those promises. So this is something India should work upon. We should improve upon this. And another point is the Voice of Global South Summit, which was started by the Modi government in 2022. From 2022 to 2023, as India was preparing for hosting the G20, India launched a new initiative to bring the Global South countries together by organizing Voice of Global South Summit. The first 2 summits were a big success. The first summit held at the end of 2022. It helped in generating the views and concerns and opinions of Global South countries, which India could introduce into the G20 discussions. Then after hosting G20, we held the second summit, which was also very successful as many Global South countries participated, and we shared the update with them regarding the progress made by India at G20 to represent the Global South. India highlighted its successful initiative to get membership of G20 for African Union. But however, what is concerning is that the third summit, which was recently organized, just few weeks ago, the third Voice of Global South Summit was organized, but it was not a big success. Many countries didn't even participate. There was lackluster participation from some of the developing, underdeveloped countries. that shows that some countries are losing interest in the initiative. So what India can do is that we should allow the G20 host to host the Voice of Global South Summit. Instead of India being the host every time, even though we started the initiative, it is better we allow other G20 countries which are hosting the G20 that year to host the Voice of Global South Summit. So that will generate more interest amongst other countries, including some big powers of the G20, to bring the Global South countries together. That will not undermine India's role or influence. India will still remain a leader of the Global South. We should allow other countries which are hosting G20 to host Voice of Global South Summit. So that could be one initiative that India should look at in order to revive Voice of Global South Summit. Because the third summit was largely seen as a failure with very limited progress. So this is what we learned from this important article. Now let's see what kind of question can be asked. Africa has emerged as a theater of competition between global powers. In the light of the statement, examine India's priorities and initiatives in West Africa. So based on what we have discussed, please write an answer to this question and try to post your answers in the comment section. Now let's move on to the next article. On the same page, we have another important column related to the current situation in Manipur. Now don't think we are repeating the same topic and the articles, because we have covered Manipur quite sufficiently. But there are new developments. There are disturbing developments happening in Manipur, which raises serious concern. And the writer, Dushyant Dave, a senior advocate, he writes in this column and calls for invocation of Article 356, which is an emergency provision under the Indian Constitution, to bring in President's rule in Manipur by suspending the state government of Manipur. Because clearly what has happened over the last 1.5 years represents a failure of the state government. A complete collapse of constitutional machinery has been noticed. And this large-scale sectarian ethnic violence is very dangerous for India's internal security. It represents the failure of the state and as well as the central government. And hence the writer is urging the center, urging the President of India to invoke this extraordinary power under Article 356 and suspend the state government and bring in President's rule in order to stabilize the security situation. Now let's dive a little deep into this article and understand whether it is feasible. Let's look at the legal constitutional constraints and let's understand in what context Article 356 can be brought in. That is, when there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery in a state, what is the process provided in the Constitution? What did our Constitution framers, what did they think about Article 356 being used? Right? Can it be invoked by the President without even waiting for a governor's report? So let's examine this and understand why the writer feels that there is a need to bring in Article 356 in order to stabilize Manipur. See, Article 356, as you all know, deals with President's rule, which is an emergency provision provided in the Constitution. It's an extraordinary provision. It obviously goes against the spirit of federalism because it gives the power to the center to dismiss the state government, the state legislature, and bring in the President's rule. So this goes against federalism, but of course it can be used only in certain extraordinary circumstances. One instance is where there is a political crisis where the ruling party is not able to establish its majority, where the state government doesn't enjoy the confidence of the legislature. In such a scenario, or even when there is a hung assembly after the elections, in those scenarios, the governor plays a critical role in government formation. And if the governor feels that it's not viable to form a ruling coalition, then governor can write a report to the president recommending President's rule to be implemented. So that is one aspect of Article 356, which is often controversial because it is often misused by the ruling party at the center to often topple governments at the state ruled by the opposition. But there is another instance under which Article 356 can be brought in. That is when there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery in the state. If it is determined that a situation has arisen where the state administration cannot be carried out in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution of India. In such a scenario, the governor can write a report to the President of India recommending the imposition of President's rule. Now, the big question is, what if the governor doesn't write such a report? What if the governor is not recommending President's rule? Now, when we say breakdown of constitutional machinery, it essentially refers to breakdown of law and order, either due to internal disturbance, as it is happening right now in Manipur. It could be riots or a civil war-like situation, a sectarian conflict, right, which has led to complete breakdown of law and order. Or it could be external aggression as well. In such extreme contingency situations, if there is a complete breakdown of law and order, if the state government is no longer able to uphold the constitutional liberties and guarantee the fundamental rights of the citizens, in such a scenario, one can determine that the constitutional machinery has broken down. It means the situation has arisen where the state administration cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. In such a scenario, the governor writes a report to the president recommending President's rule. But the question is, what if the governor doesn't write that report? Because if you look at Manipur, the situation has been nothing short of extraordinary. The ethnic violence between the Meiteis and the Kuki-Zo community, it has reached alarming levels. More than 250 people have been killed. Lakhs of people have been displaced on both sides. And please remember, this is purely internal sectarian conflict. It's not a case of insurgency or terrorism, which we have seen across Northeast India or in Jammu and Kashmir or in Punjab. This is one of the most unique security threats India has ever faced. No other Indian state has seen such prolonged sectarian violence on ethnic lines. So it is indeed extraordinary for India to be going through such a situation, and the state government, the current ruling party, the BJP at the state level, has been held accountable for the failure to maintain law and order. Even the center has been heavily criticized by the opposition, by media, by civil society, even by the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister himself has been personally blamed for not intervening, for not visiting the state even once, despite the crisis and the seriousness of the situation. So, in this context, the writer is suggesting that President's rule should be imposed without waiting for the governor's report. Given that the ruling party at center and state are the same, it's unlikely that the governor is going to write a report recommending President's rule, because that would be acceptance of failure of governance by the ruling BJP, which could cause political embarrassment. So that is why the governments at the state and center are trying to avoid Article 356. But the writer says the president has an extraordinary power under Article 356. The president can recommend imposition of President's rule without waiting for a governor's report. So let's understand how this provision was brought into the Indian Constitution. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was actively supporting the inclusion of this provision, where the president could, based on facts available, based on the understanding of the president, can call for President's rule without waiting for governor's report if there was an extraordinary security situation where constitutional machinery had collapsed. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly in 1949 actively supported this power to be vested with the President of India. So here the President can proceed even without the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. The President, in his or her own conscience, based on the facts available from the state, can determine that there is a breakdown of law and order, breakdown of constitutional machinery, that the state government is no longer able to protect the fundamental rights of people. In such a scenario, even if governor is not writing a report recommending President's rule, the president can go ahead and call for imposition of President's rule. Now, this issue, when it was debated in the Constituent Assembly, it was very controversial because some members were against it. For example, H.V. Kamath, a key member of the Constituent Assembly, strongly opposed this provision where president could recommend the imposition of President's rule. He said that this is the equivalent of a constitutional crime because this could be misused. If the president can interfere in the state, this could lead to breakdown of the federal relations. But it was actively supported by other key members of the Constituent Assembly. For example, Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer. He strongly defended this power, which was supported by the entire Constituent Assembly, that if there is such a serious breakdown of law and order and a complete collapse of the constitutional machinery, then it is the duty of the union government to step in. It's the duty of the president to step in and dismiss the government which has failed to uphold the provisions of the constitution. This was supported by K. Santanam as well. K. Santanam was of the view that if there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery, it is safe to assume that there is a physical collapse of the government, meaning the state administration is no longer functioning, either due to internal threat or due to external aggression. So in such a scenario, the central government, on the directions of the president, can step in. It was seen as a justified power to be vested with the president and the central government. It was seen as absolutely essential to protect the unity and integrity of the nation and to protect the fundamental rights of citizens. Even Thakur Das Bhargava, another key member of the Constituent Assembly, supported this power being vested with the president, where the president on their own can recommend the imposition of president's rule without waiting for a governor's report. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar went on to support this provision, and eventually it was adopted into the Indian Constitution. Because see, under Article 355, the union has a duty to assist the state governments. There is an obligation on the union to assist the states if they are facing an economic crisis or a disaster or a security situation. It is the duty, the obligation of the union to assist the states in any means necessary, by providing additional funds, by deploying additional security forces, right? By providing any support that is needed. And this also means that union has a duty to look after the administration as well under an emergency situation. Now, obviously, in a state like Manipur, it is safe to assume that the union has tried to do its best in supporting the state, although unsuccessfully. For example, in Manipur, in the current context in Manipur, over the last 1.5 years, the center has been providing central armed police forces. It has increased the deployment of paramilitary forces from Assam Rifles to BSF to CRPF, including Indian Army, have been deployed in Manipur. Thousands of additional troops have been rushed. And the center is providing intelligence support as well and backing the state government. Despite the best efforts of the union, now the efforts are seen as unsuccessful with regard to the persistent violence which has continued, and it has escalated off late as well. So now the situation is clear that there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery, according to the writer. He even blames the Supreme Court for not intervening in this regard, because the Supreme Court has been looking at the situation in Manipur. It has received several petitions. It has heard multiple petitions, multiple hearings have taken place, and yet the Supreme Court has not pushed the president or the center to consider imposing Article 356. So the writer is of the strong opinion that the time has come to dismiss the state government in order to protect the people of Manipur, be it Meiteis, be it Kukizo, because both sides are now resorting to violence by force as a means of defending themselves. It has reached a very alarming situation where there has been large-scale attacks against communities on both sides. Armed groups of Kukis and Meiteis have been targeting each other. And this situation, which is escalating, is simply not tolerable in a democratic state. So it's under these extraordinary circumstances that the writer is calling for president's rule to be imposed, and the president of India can do this. The president can invoke this special power, recommend the imposition of president's rule, even without the report of the governor. Now let's look at a related article on the front page. Just the other day, I explained a recent incident in Manipur, a shocking incident where more than 6 people from Meitei community were kidnapped by alleged Kukizo militants. All these kidnapped people have been found dead. Their dead bodies were found floating in various rivers, and this has triggered fresh tensions, and Meiteis have been protesting, resorting to violence, and this has been met with counter-violence. So center has been rushing additional troops. The Indian Army has been called in to maintain the order, probably for the first time since the start of the crisis. Because until now, it was Assam Rifles and CRPF with some battalions of BSF which had been deployed. These CAPFs were sent in by the Home Ministry and thousands of additional troops were brought in. But now with fresh escalation in violence, even Indian Army has been called in to play a role in maintaining law and order and to prevent the cycle of violence between the two communities. So that is another important development. Now let's head towards the prelim section. We have 5 important articles. So let's take a quick look at the prelims articles. So as you know, Delhi NCR region is choking with deadly air quality. The air quality index has surpassed 450, meaning the scale itself has been breached. And this is a severe case of air pollution. And this has become the norm in Delhi NCR every winter. So of course, I'll not go into all the reasons and causes that we have discussed multiple times. But here there is an important development. The Supreme Court has slammed the Commission on Air Quality Management for failing to implement the strict restrictions under the Graded Response Action Plan. See, given the alarming air pollution that occurs in Delhi NCR every winter, the Supreme Court had intervened a few years ago and it had provided for a Graded Response Action Plan that provides for a series of restrictions to be imposed to curb the sources of pollution with strict measures in order to improve the air quality on the air quality index. And to enforce this Graded Response Action Plan, it constituted a Commission on Air Quality Management, CAQM. So now the Supreme Court has slammed this commission for failing to impose the restrictions, for delaying the decisions under the Graded Response Action Plan. The GRAP is a set protocol. The moment air quality index crosses a certain threshold, automatically certain restrictions have to be implemented and enforced by the CAQM. But this time, the CAQM has delayed its decisions by several days, even after air quality index breached the 450 mark. It was hoping that air quality will improve. But by the time the restrictions were brought in, there was fresh pollution, more pollutants and particulate matter added, which has increased the alarming levels of pollution and the toxicity in the air, and that has called for the Supreme Court to intervene. So let's understand what is GRAP and what is the role of CAQM. So as I told you, Graded Response Action Plan is a step-by-step incremental set of restrictions on economic activities that will be enforced by CAQM. It was brought out under the directions of the Supreme Court, and the Commission on Air Quality Management works closely with Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change and with the local authorities. It will work with the local municipal authorities in Delhi NCR region and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change at the center to restrict some of the activities, pollution causing activities, depending on the air quality index. So there are 4 stages identified under the Graded Response Action Plan. If the air quality breaches the 200 mark, and if it is between 200 to 300, air quality is considered to be poor and stage 1 of Graded Response Action Plan has to be enforced. Under stage 1, certain basic restrictions are brought in. Some of the orders of National Green Tribunal and Supreme Court on pollution is immediately implemented. For example, a ban on old diesel and petrol vehicles. These old vehicles are taken off the roads mandatorily with strict enforcement and penalties. So such measures are implemented. Schools will be declaring holidays so that children are protected, and few basic restrictions come in place. Now, if the air quality breaches the 300 mark and comes in this bracket of 300 to 400, air quality is very poor, then comes the second stage of Graded Response Action Plan, where more serious measures are implemented at the hotspots and immediate restrictions are placed on usage of diesel generators. Industrial activities are curbed to an extent. Vehicle emission will be curbed to an extent through a set of standard restrictions which are to be enforced by the Commission on Air Quality Management. Then comes stage 3. If the air quality breaches the 400 mark, comes in the range of 401 to 450, then comes stage 3, where even vehicles with decent emission standards will be taken off the roads. Vehicles which are BS3 graded or BS4 with regard to diesel vehicles, these vehicles are banned. They are taken off the roads, which means only vehicles with most efficient emission standards can ply on the road, but rest of the vehicles are taken off and schools will be closed for a long time. So these set of basic measures will come in place. It will prohibit certain construction industrial activity. It will prohibit the operation of thermal power plants, for example. It will also place restrictions on cleaning and any setting of fire in the region. Local municipal authorities and the individuals as well are prohibited from setting unnecessary fires. Then comes the final stage with the strictest restrictions when air quality breaches the 450 mark. This is the most severe stage of air pollution, where the air becomes so toxic that it could have detrimental impact on one's health. So immediate restrictions come in to restrict various economic activities. The odd even rule to take out half of the vehicles from the road. Complete ban on construction, complete ban on industrial activities, especially power plants. Right? So such measures are to be enforced by CAQM. But Supreme Court has found that CAQM has failed in its responsibility. The irony was, even though CAQM claimed that construction was banned, within the premises of Supreme Court, there is construction taking place, even as air quality has crossed 450 mark on the air quality index. So hence Supreme Court has stepped in and criticized the lack of enforcement of graded response action plan by the Commission on Air Quality Management. Next, we have an article referring to Chennai-Vladivostok Maritime Corridor. India's Minister for Ports, Sarbanand Sonowal, has attended a very important conclave organized in India known as Sagar Manthan. Please make a note of this. It can be very important for your prelims. Sagar Manthan is a new maritime dialogue or a conclave or a conference or a symposium which has been started from this year. The first edition of Sagar Manthan was held. It is organized by ORF, Observer Research Foundation, which is a leading foreign policy think tank in India based out of New Delhi, in association with the Ministry of Ports. So essentially, the government with ORF, which is a think tank, have jointly organized Sagar Manthan, and this will be a recurring event which will focus on maritime trade, ocean trade routes. It will focus on shipping infrastructure, maritime corridors. This will be the focus of this conclave. At this conclave, the central minister has pointed out that the Chennai-Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor that creates a shorter route between India and Russia has become operational since last year. By end of 2023, this strategic trade route has been opened up, linking the city of Chennai with the city of Vladivostok in the Far East region of Russia. Now, this is a very, very big development. I'll explain why. I'll come to it. The minister has also highlighted the role of IMEC corridor, which was launched last year at the G20 summit, which will connect India with Middle East and Europe to create a futuristic trade corridor and connectivity route that will link Indian economy with West Asian economies and European economies. Now, if you look at Chennai-Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor, this was a proposed project from many, many years, because the traditional route between India and Russia is a very long circuitous route. For trade between India and Russia, the ships had to pass through this traditional route via Arabian Sea, crossing the Horn of Africa, Gulf of Aden, via Bab el-Mandeb Strait to reach the Red Sea, then cross the Suez Canal in Egypt to reach the Mediterranean, and move across the Atlantic and the North Sea to reach the Baltic Sea and then reach Russia. This was a very long circuitous route. It would take almost 40 days to ship the goods between India and Russia. The distance was more, the cost was higher. So this was a strain on logistics, which was hampering India-Russia relations. So both countries proposed a new maritime link, and now they have completed and operationalized this maritime corridor to connect Chennai on the eastern seaboard of India and link this with Vladivostok, a strategic port of Russia in its Far East region. The Russian Far East, the Siberia region, is blessed with resources from hydrocarbons to precious metals and minerals and coal. Precious resources are found in the Russian Far East. And India is a big investor. There are many Indian companies which have already invested in Russian Far East. India has even granted concessional loan to Russia up to $1 billion to step up investments in Russian Far East. So both countries have created this shorter maritime link connecting Chennai with Vladivostok through the Malacca Strait. And it reduces the travel duration by 16 days. The earlier 40-day route will now take just 24 days. So 16-day reduction in the travel period and a 40% reduction in the distance. So this means enormous savings on the shipping cost. It will reduce the fuel consumption, speed up transportation, and it is going to boost India-Russia trade. Plus, it establishes India's strategic influence in the Far East and towards the North Pacific as well. It allows India to even further project influence towards the Arctic and compete with other powers for Arctic resources as well. So that is the importance of the Chennai-Vladivostok Maritime Corridor. In fact, other major ports of India like Visakhapatnam, Paradeep and even Kolkata, right, which are located on the eastern seaboard, they can make use of the maritime corridor to provide better link with Russia. Now coming to the IMEC project, which was launched at G20, it aims to create a efficient modern connectivity trade route from India to West Asia by creating a maritime and as well as a railway based connectivity. It will help India link with United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, further with Jordan and Israel to link with the strategic Haifa port in Israel. It will also include pipelines and digital connectivity along this corridor, and it will further link with Europe to link with the Piraeus port in Greece and connect with Italy, France, then further with inland Europe, including Germany. All these countries are actively looking at IMEC as a transformative project. It is backed by United States. US and India announced the launch of IMEC project at last year's G20, and it includes all these countries. It will create a more efficient, reliable trade route. But of course, now the execution of IMEC has been disrupted because of the crisis in West Asia. The Gaza war and Israel's hostilities with other actors in the region has destabilized this particular route. But in the future, there is great potential for the IMEC project. Now coming to the next article on page 12. The article refers to the appointment of a new Comptroller and Auditor General by the President of India. Since the CAG was completing his term, a new CAG has been appointed. An IAS officer from the 1989 batch, K. Sanjay Murthy, has been appointed by the President as the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. So let's quickly understand the role, the duties, the powers of the CAG and the appointment and removal process. I hope all of you know that CAG is a constitutional body. Under the Indian Constitution, we have Articles 148 to 151, which contains provisions related to the Comptroller Auditor General. So this is where all the provisions are defined, be it the role and duties and the powers, and as well as the appointment, removal of the CAG, etc. The CAG plays a key role in auditing the accounts of the government, in auditing the receipts and expenditure of the center, the state government, and any other body, including PSUs, that receive funding from the government. According to B.R. Ambedkar, CAG was the critical constitutional body to maintain financial discipline, to ensure that there are no unnecessary wasteful expenditures, and to improve the efficiency of government expenditure. So this key position is filled by the President. The President of India appoints the CAG under his hand and seal and administers the oath to the CAG. So here the President is of course bound by the decision of the Council of Ministers. The aid and advice of Council of Ministers is binding in this case. It's not a discretionary power, of course. So as advised by the Council of Ministers, the President will appoint the CAG, administer the oath, and the CAG will hold the office for 6 years or till the age of 65 years, whichever is earlier. So when it comes to removal or resignation, CAG can resign by addressing the letter to the President of India if the CAG is seeking a voluntary resignation. And the CAG can be removed on the grounds of proven misbehavior or incapacity. And this removal process is similar to the removal of a Supreme Court judge. That is the protection which has been given, so that the CAG can be an independent constitutional body which is not obligated to the government. Because to remove the CAG, there should be a resolution passed with special majority in both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. And the charges should be on the grounds of proven misbehavior or incapacity. Only then can the President remove the CAG. So this protection with regard to the removal secures the tenure of the CAG and allows the CAG to be independent. That is why CAG is a feared institution by the government. It helps in holding the government accountable for the expenditure and financial expenses. So these audited reports are presented to the President and Governor respectively in the case of center and state. And eventually, these reports are laid in front of the legislature, in front of the Parliament and the state assemblies. That is why the CAG performs a pivotal role. Coming to the next article on page 14, we have a big update on India's space program. ISRO has successfully launched the next generation communication satellite, the GSAT N2, also named as the GSAT 20. It's a heavy communication satellite. But what is unique is that the satellite was not launched by ISRO, because ISRO's heavy launch capabilities are still limited. Communication satellites of the GSAT series, they weigh anywhere above 4 to 5 tons. It requires a much powerful rocket to lift these satellites into the geosynchronous transfer orbit. Right now, ISRO's primary workhorse, the PSLV, can successfully, reliably place the payloads into low Earth orbit. We do have the GSLV, which has been pioneered to lift heavier payloads into higher orbit. But when it comes to heavy communication satellite, India tends to rely on foreign vendors to launch those satellites. Until now, ISRO always relied upon Arianespace, a French-European company. It was part of close India-France, India-Europe relations. So this French-European space company called Arianespace was often launching ISRO's heavy communication satellites from its spaceport in South America, in Suriname, in French Guyana. Right, that is where Arianespace had a spaceport in Latin America. From there, the heavy communication satellites of ISRO would be launched. But now with improving India-US space relations, India-US have become very close space partners. We have signed the Artemis Accords, under which we are working with US and other countries to return back to the moon, to place astronauts back on the moon. And the US is going to help India to even send astronauts into orbit to train for the Gaganyaan mission. So as part of this cooperation, India is now working closely with SpaceX, the space company owned by Elon Musk. So this communication satellite of ISRO was launched by SpaceX through its Falcon 9 rocket. A very powerful rocket. Even NASA relies on the Falcon 9 to serve the International Space Station. And in fact, one of the Indian astronauts who's part of the Gaganyaan mission will very soon fly to the International Space Station on a SpaceX rocket. So this highlights the close space ties between India-US and the growing relations between ISRO and SpaceX. This communication satellite is mainly meant for improving broadband internet connectivity in-flight internet connectivity in airplanes, etc. So it's a dedicated communication satellite operating in the Ka band, which can provide high-speed internet and reliable broadband internet connection. Next, another article related to space technology and as well as environment ecology. As you all know, stubble burning is one of the primary contributors to the deadly air pollution seen in Delhi NCR region, where farmers in Punjab, Haryana and around Delhi NCR, they set fire to the farm fields to clear the stubble. This releases a lot of particulate matter which accumulates in Delhi NCR, leading to the toxic air condition. Now, did you know these stubbles can be monitored from satellites? There are specific satellites which have a unique payload. They have these infrared imaging systems through which they can detect forest fires or even farm fires from space. Right now, there are two American satellites that we rely upon. One is owned by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and there is another satellite called the Suomi. These two American satellites, which are in the polar orbit, they play a key role in tracking the farm fires in Punjab. They provide very accurate real-time data regarding the fires which are lit. But one shortcoming is that these satellites that take the polar orbit, they have a specific duration, a specific window where they cover a certain part of the earth. Now, in the case of these American satellites, they pass over northern India only between 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. In a day, they make two fly-ins. Only then they can capture the farm fires which are set by the farmers in Punjab, Haryana and in the region. Now, several farmers who are aware of this because of media reports are trying to evade these American satellites and setting farm fires either early in the morning and extinguishing them by afternoon or in late afternoon and late evening. So this is affecting the data that we are collecting. Current data shows that across Punjab there are thousands of fires. Even in Pakistan, on the Pakistani side of Punjab, the extent of farm fires have gone up. So tracking those fires is very critical. There are other satellites in geosynchronous orbit which provide constant watch. For example, there is a South Korean satellite that we rely upon, the GeoComSat, which provides for continuous coverage. We also have the European Space Agency's Sentinel satellites. But what we need is better tracking and surveillance. We can't just rely on satellites in polar orbit because they provide very limited coverage. So researchers, experts are pointing out that we should develop better methods. It's not just important to know the number of fires. We should also know the extent of fires, the area which has been set on fire. What is the extent of pollutants which can be released? Only with such specific estimates can we plan and prepare for the deadly air pollution and eventually take action against the farmers as well to curb stubble burning. But one positive point is that over the years, stubble burning is definitely coming down. The data shows that. For example, few years ago in 2016, more than 1,33,000 farm fires were detected. But this time, from September to November in 2024, just around 42,000 fires have been reported. So this is a significant drop. Both in Punjab and Haryana, there is a significant reduction compared to previous years. But there are still thousands of fires being lit by farmers, and we need to find better ways of tracking and enforcing the rules against stubble burning. So that is what we take away from this article. It helps you understand the different technologies being used to track farm fires. Now, if you guys like the session and if you want any further updates regarding current affairs, do join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code. And if you understood all the topics, do let me know in the comments. Do press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next class.